There has been a slight change to the agenda, not in terms of content, but in terms of title. So next up, we're going to be looking at how sovereign wealth funds invest in venture capital. And sovereign wealth funds, as I'm sure many of you know, they represent over $8 trillion in assets globally. And because of their long-term nature and appetite for growth, they can and absolutely should invest in venture capital. I'm very excited that our next speaker is with us today, mainly because he spends about 360 days a year traveling. So I'm very happy to welcome Ibrahim Ajami. He's the head of venture capital at Mubadala Investment Company. Please welcome Ibrahim to the stage.
Hi,
Thank you. Hi, Ibrahim.
Before lunch, so everybody's hungry.
Yeah, everyone's hungry, but it's venture capital, so it's an exciting topic. That's okay. So we heard from Waleed yesterday about some of the some of the things that you're doing in venture capital, particularly in China. So I'll touch on some of those points later. But Mubadala Ventures is a relatively new created sort of division within Mubadala. Can you maybe talk a bit about the rationale for its establishment?
Yeah, I think it was about 3 years ago where, Mubadala's been an investor in technology for quite some time, for over a decade now, around the world. But really it was around 3 years ago where we made a decision to become much more proactive and on the ground with venture capital. As we looked at our entire global portfolio with industrial assets and operating businesses around the world, our thesis was, number one, no technology company is a local company. You have to think globally about it. Number two is you can really start great technology companies in any market around the world. And venture capital specifically is a hyper-competitive and nature of an industry where you really have to be on the ground, you have to be engaged in the community. There's such a very strong community aspect to the business itself. So our first step really was, let's go to San Francisco, because that's Silicon Valley is where the real venture capital industry, even though now you have hotbeds in China, you have in Europe, you have other pockets of real innovation. But we started in Silicon Valley, where we set up a team 3 years ago, actually, end of 2016 now, where we actually set up a team on the ground and we rolled out our strategy and we said, it's time for us to really get into venture capital. It wasn't easy in the beginning. Well, still not easy today, but it was very challenging as we arrived in Silicon Valley and we were telling a story and saying, this is what Mubadala is, this is how we do things, this is our strategy in tech, and we want to be a part of the venture community. And we had a strategy of investing in funds, and we also had a strategy of investing directly into companies. So the first 6 to 12 months, as we've told our story, we started building relationships, building networks, and building a team on the ground. I would say the one last comment on this is there were sort of two really main points of feedback. Number one is, are you a tourist investor? So tourist investor, us sovereign wealth funds, we hear tech is great, tech is fancy, so let's go and invest in tech and throw capital around. And then when things get tough, you will sort of shift and leave. So that's number one. We have to prove that we're here for the long term, we're committed, and we're here to stay. And the point number two is, are we going to also support the investors in carrying the founder journey on our shoulders, which is, how do we support the founders? How do we support the technology companies? And we've proven over the past 3 years that that's an important role for us in the venture industry around supporting companies as they go through the ups and downs of building a technology company.
Just actually on that first point that you made about, are you here for the long term, are you here to stay? You do have an office in Silicon Valley now, you have offices in China, and Mubadala has offices around the world. What other offices globally are you leveraging that Mubadala presence specifically for technology?
For tech. Yeah, so I think there are, we have an office in San Francisco. We have an office in New York. We're just setting up in London to focus on Europe. And then, as some of you heard, our deputy CEO sort of talk about China. We're looking into opening in Beijing next year. So then what that does is it really enables a team on the ground to be focused with a very clear community strategy, working closely with the founders on the ground. Because no founder or entrepreneur, when they need to speak to an investor or a partner, is going to, and they will, but wait till they speak to us back in Abu Dhabi or wait for us to fly to San Francisco. I mean, these are very quick decisions, intense dynamics that founders are going through day in and day out, the technology investors.
And I guess you don't want to take them away from their core business for too long either, because that's a risk to
you want them.
company.
You want them to stay focused. You want them to, and the syndicate of partners and investors working with you. You have to be very complementary, and you working together to support that company. So that's a big part. We like to say that there is no other venture investor in the world. There's a lot of great venture investors in the world that have a differentiated and different value proposition, but there's no venture investor in the world today like Mubadala that is on the ground, engaged in the local communities, but yet has a global network of relationships and assets and connectivity like Mubadala. And what we do is we strive very hard day in and day out to provide that access to our founders. That's a big part of our value proposition. But you have to be able to take these calls at 6 a.m. or at midnight, and you have to be able to show up in an hour's call to meet with a founder and deal with a customer issue or market issue or product or a fundraise. Remember, these founders are putting their entire lives on the line, entire lives to build these companies. And the chances of success for early stage technology companies is quite low. So they're putting their entire lives, their relationships, their capital, their livelihoods. You want to be able to be there for them.
And so can you give me some examples of that support that you provide to them? Is it more on the relationship side or on the fundraising side? How do you help them?
I mean, so 3 years into it, I would say some of the biggest areas that we've provided support are opening doors in our network of assets and companies. So Mubadala is a large owner in businesses in semiconductors and mining and aluminum, and we have data centers here, we have telecom companies, we have banks. We're either large investors or majority owners, et cetera. So we have a team here in Abu Dhabi that we refer to as the value creation team. And what the value creation team is, once we make an investment, we engage with the leadership of that company and we say, okay, your technology company or your software or your offering could be applicable to these 6 businesses that we own or these 6 industries that we're heavy in. And then we start opening doors. And it's not just sending an email or connecting, but we go through a process of really opening doors and engaging with the respective management teams to support these technology companies. It takes hard work. You have to be thoughtful about when you open these doors, how you open these doors. You have to be thoughtful about how you engage with these companies, how much you push, how much you pull. We can't guarantee any of these customer access, but what we do is we commit to working very hard to opening doors. That's one. Number 2 is we also, as a global financial institution, we are big investors in major funds. SoftBank Vision Fund is one, but we're also investors in other significant technology funds around the world, in China. So we also connect our founders to these funds, and we talk about how we could potentially partner with them to further invest in these businesses where we feel. Number 3 is relationships around the world with governments. Whenever we need to make some calls in different countries where we believe our relationships can provide a unique opportunity for that founder or for that company to potentially execute on their strategy. So these are various examples. You have to work, as the investor, you have to work just as hard, if not harder, than what the founder is doing to support that company. You're not just investing in a story. Early stage tech investing is not just investing in a story and then sitting down and hoping that that story will unfold. The likelihood of that story unfolding, the way you've made that investment is very, very low. You have to work with the technology company and with the founder on curating that story and that strategy over a period of 5 to 10 years.
I'm sure that's music to the founder's ears. You did briefly mention the Vision Fund, and I do want to talk about that a little bit more. Have you been happy with the performance of that, and has it achieved what you wanted? Obviously recent.
I figured you were going to ask me that question. To level set everybody, I mean, at Vision Fund, we are SoftBank Vision Fund. We are the second largest investor in the SoftBank Vision Fund. We committed as Mubadala $15 billion to that fund. And so far, the fund has invested in about 83 technology companies. And we are happy. Also a reminder that our investment is structured in a very unique way. It's very different from your typical technology funds. 60% of our capital is structured as a sort of a preferred debt-like instrument. So we generate a return on that instrument. SoftBank Vision Fund is the most significant technology in the world. These 83 companies play a vital role in many of our lives and lives of people around the world. They have changed industries like transportation and healthcare and enterprise software and food. The performance of the fund, notwithstanding one major investment which has not delivered, and we're very disappointed there, the performance of the fund has been doing well, and we are 3 years into it. These funds ultimately take 5 to 10 years before we really see how this performance plays out. So we're in it, we're partners with them, we've committed, and we continue to be optimistic about where it's going.
And I'd like to also, discuss the ecosystem in Abu Dhabi. But firstly, Waleed made a great comment yesterday when he said technology is a great enabler, but it's not an end in and of itself. And I guess that really sits in with that most innovation often happens at the intersection. Where are you seeing these intersections at the moment? Or the
Yeah,
most
I mean, I think we've been saying this obviously, and this is, Waleed's been mapping this strategy very clearly for us at Mubadala. It's not a vertical. We just can't look at it as a vertical. It's horizontal across a lot of the other industries. Every industry or every company today that is not built on top of a significant software mindset or a data mindset is going to be at a disadvantage. So we are very excited around how technology is playing a big role in healthcare and life sciences. That's a big industry for us, and we're seeing significant changes there. We're making investments in the US and in China in that space. We think we are at the early innings of technology transforming financial services. Banks, as we know them today, are changing very rapidly. If you look at some of the big players in the US, big players in Europe, with some of these new age banks, we think financial services, we're just at the early stage. One example I like to give is in the US alone. In the US alone, the big banks charge $50 billion a year, $50 billion a year on overdraft fees to their clients. Just think about the opportunity of how much value that a new technology or innovator can come and capture away from just simple overdraft. So that's another area we like. On the industrial space, we are investing in robotics, we're investing in enterprise software, we're investing in automation, and also logistics and supply chain is a big area. You want your products delivered to you right away. We all know the investments that Amazon is making in an offering like Prime. Prime, you can get your product in 12 hours or in 24 hours. That takes in significant amount of technology investments in logistics. So that's another area that we are spending and investing and evaluating across the world.
And 10 years ago when Mubadala was a $20 billion company, you wouldn't look at investments less than, say, 100 million because it wasn't worth it in terms of time and resources. And I think this year, you've been making, through your division, through making investments, sub the $1 million mark.
Yeah, we made $1 million investment, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously requires quite a different skill set from a human capital perspective as well. How difficult has that been in terms of finding talent, or how have you been going about making those smaller investments?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I think, you have to build an on the ground team that's very much engaged on the ground. If you're going to make $1 million investments or anything less than that, you have to have a team that's connected deeply into the community. Number two, listen, the teams have to wake up every day thinking about the founders. And, you're out there farming every single day, looking for opportunities, meeting founders, evaluating. Before you make an investment, you want to meet 5, 6, 7, 8 companies that are potentially developing similar products. So it takes a certain amount of muscle and skill and energy to constantly evaluate and recognizing very quickly that if you make $1 million investment, it might not pan out. So you have to pivot very quick and you have to move. But really what's interesting for us is not just investing that $1 million investment or partnering with some of our early stage funds. What's interesting for us is making that $1 million investment, then making the $10 million investment after a year because we've seen some real traction, then making the $50 million investment after 2 years because this is starting to look like a winner, and then making a $200 million investment because we've identified a winner 4 years ago. And we know the management team, we know the board, we know the market, we know the product, and we've seen the signals because we have insider information into how this private company is growing. And I think that's potentially the model that we want to execute on. If we execute on it moving forward, as we see some of our companies start growing, then I think it's a new approach to venture investment that a sovereign wealth fund like us has not done before, and we believe Mubadala is very well positioned to do that.
I mean, I guess that gives you inside information. It's your risk reduction strategy.
Yeah. And remember, these tech companies, especially from a tech cycle, I mean, you really have 3 to 4 years. Sometimes there's a little bit longer, but you really have the 3 to 4 years. You would know in 3 to 4 years if there's something going to be built that's of a real business here. Or else you haven't really demonstrated real product market fit. You haven't really demonstrated that that's the right technology. Technology protocols or platforms or architectures have shifted at that point, and you're built on the previous one. So in 3 to 4 years, you would know if this is something that Mubadala should, double down or triple down on. And I think being on the ground and being engaged in the communities and with a lot of partners, we've invested in funds in the US, in Europe, even in the Middle East. We've just rolled out our Middle East strategy in China. So these partners also play a very important role in our venture strategy and our venture. I just want to make one comment around that now. We've taken all that learnings of Silicon Valley in the past 3 years, and we've started in Europe a year ago, and we're going to start really spending significant amount of effort and team and capital in the region.
Yeah.
And we're looking for partners in the region, and we're going to be expanding in the region. And we're very excited about potentially the role that not only Abu Dhabi plays, but just the region around us, around sort of incubating and building great technology businesses.
And we've got a few minutes left, and that's a great point to end on, is there are a number of tech initiatives, in Abu Dhabi. You've now got Hub 71, you've got Abu Dhabi Investment Officer, obviously, Mubadala Ventures. Yeah. How are you ensuring that there's not too much overlap? How many players can there be, and how are you actually working together to create this ecosystem?
Yeah, there isn't enough. We need a lot more in the region. We have incredible talent, a lot of entrepreneurs. What we believe we're doing in Abu Dhabi is unique, but again, what's happening around the region in Saudi, in Bahrain, in Dubai, I mean, there's a lot of exciting initiatives. We love to tell the story, and we know the story of Kareem, where they went from idea to product in the market in like 7 weeks. There's incredible amount of talent because you can build a software company today with very little investment. There's a lot of great talent that can build technology companies. We actually need more capital, more engagement, more government policy, more resources, more mentorship to support our talent. And Mubadala can play one role in that. In Abu Dhabi, what we've done is our collective approach between ADGM from a regulatory, from a community perspective, ADIO, which is around economic development, Mubadala from an investment perspective, and then Hub 71. Hub 71 is really, I like to call it sort of our startup platform. It's our calling to accelerate, to invite, to support, to grow startup resources and startup talent in the region. Because these startups need community. These startups need community because they're going through all these challenges day in and day out. So you need to be a part of community where you can talk to people, you can reach out for people, you can get help. So how do we get all these resources to work together? And we will make a lot of mistakes. And we will invest in some companies that don't work out. And we will potentially evolve our policies and strategies. But ultimately, we're very committed to around how technology and entrepreneurship and this talent can come together to build great technology businesses. And we believe we're one of the better positioned in the region to do that here in Abu Dhabi.
Excellent. Well, You've actually managed to time it so that we have 2 seconds left, and I think that's a very
Thank you.
optimistic note
Thank
to
you,
finish
Rachel.
on.
We
You
can
know,
let
the
them go to
work
lunch.
here that you're doing is really fabulous, and I'm happy that you're in the country to have this talk today.
Thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking Ibrahim Ajami, Head of Mubadala Ventures.